and thank you so much for joining me. I have spent the morning looking into Prince Harry's visa document release, and if you're anything like me, you're probably a little bit confused because there's so many headlines, and when you click into all these stories, it's a little bit hard to ascertain the actual facts. What has actually happened? What do we know? What don't we know? So I tried to ascertain those facts for you, and I'll share them with you. But before I get into what I've found, let's just have a look at a few of the headlines that are out there. This is from news.com. Glaring omission as Prince Harry's US visa application is unsealed. Now, Lexi Cartwright does make the good point that more questions have been raised than have been answered. And I think that's valid from what I've found. ABC News in my country, US releases redacted documents in Prince Harry's visa case. Now, the point about reduction is also a very valid point. They have been quite heavily redacted. GBN, Prince Harry's visa documents finally released after Duke's drug claim sparked deportation battle. Well, the first part of that headline about the visa documents finally released is apt. I think that's a fair enough statement. I mean, let's face it, this all kicked off last year, and, we have been waiting a very long time for some sort of resolution, for some sort of information. As far as the claim about a deportation battle, I think they're getting ahead of themselves a little bit. A proper deportation battle has not taken place as yet. I think it is wishful thinking on the part of GBN. And finally, the Telegraph in the UK, Prince Harry court files heavily redacted over fears of unwanted media attention. Now, this is interesting because this was the argument from Judge Nicol. Documents outline why there is not strong enough public interest argument to disclose Duke of Sussex's immigration records in full. Now, I beg to differ. I think there is enormous public interest. I think that, there is obvious enormous public interest. Before I get into the facts of what we actually know now, I think you'll agree with me that there is a perception around the world in many countries that there is a resentment about so-called two-tier justice. Particularly in the UK at the moment, it's a very fraught issue. It's being heavily debated. Due to cultural, sort of background and things like that, there's a perception that courts sometimes go easily on people just due to that sort of cultural difference, and people object and really don't like it. And the Starmer government's been stumbling over all these arguments, trying to claim that that's not the case and that they will actually fight that. But documents have been revealed that, in fact, the opposite was the case for a considerable amount of time. And I think there's a perception also in the USA, I think there's a perception in Australia as well, that we want everyone to be equal under the law. Just because you're very rich or happen to be a prince of the realm, you shouldn't get a, get out of jail free card. You shouldn't get a free pass. The law should apply equally to everybody. Now, of course, that's quite a naive concept because we know that the law is not applied equally to everybody. Obviously, that if you have the economic security of being able to fight it with the top lawyers and being able to, develop your own team to represent you if you get into a sticky situation, well then, yeah, the more resources you have at your disposal, the more people that you know, generally, the more favourable the outcome. So I'm not suggesting that, the law is applied equally. I'm not that naive, but we want the perception that the law is actually applied, as much as we can, All right, let's get on to the facts. This is what I found this morning. More than 80 pages of court filings and transcripts related to Prince Harry's immigration status were actually released late yesterday, my time. Now, these released documents are heavily redacted. I will just give you a visual clue of heavy redaction. This is actually off one of the documents, and it's a bit of a hoot when you see it. It's really a visual joke. I mean, obviously there are bits you can read, but pretty much a lot of it really does look like that. So yeah, bit of heavy redaction going on. Now that was because well, I guess the main point is, and this is the main point of everything that I think people aren't spelling out enough, is the fact that the visa application, Prince Harry's visa application, has not been released. And so that means we have no further specific details about what he disclosed on his immigration form, because that form hasn't been released. So we don't know whether he was honest about his past or current drug use. We have no way of knowing because that has not been released under the Freedom of Information Act. So we're all none the wiser. And of course, that was the main thing that the Heritage Foundation were pushing to find out. Had Harry actually misrepresented his prior drug use on his entry to the USA in 2020 with Meghan Markle on his freedom flight? They wanted to find out, had he misrepresented his drug use? And had he been granted any special favours in order to gain entry to the USA back in 2020. Now, they sought all this information under the Freedom of Information Act. And like I said, those questions were the prevailing points they were making: misrepresentation and special favour. Now, Judge Carl Nickel ruled in favour of releasing some documents back in September 2024, but even back then, he stated that the public did not have a strong enough interest in Harry's full immigration file. Now, I would love to argue that with Judge Nickel over a dinner party conversation sometime. I think I would make a good case. Now, Harry's team, it is important to say, has always maintained that he was truthful in his application. And while US visa forms still ask about past and current drug use, immigration authorities do have discretion in what they actually grant. They can decide just because you admit to prior drug use does not mean that automatically you will not be granted access to the USA on a visa. It does not mean that. The issue is lying. They don't like lying, and it is a very serious offence to actually lie on your immigration form, and that is the point of the whole exercise. So if you were going to go to the USA and you needed a visa to enter because you were going to do some work, or you needed some special authority to enter the USA, not just as a tourist, it is wise to be honest about your drug use because, like I said, the powers that be will, use their discretion and decide whether you are granted entry. Now, it would have to be a fairly extreme case and also fairly obvious that you were still recently being intoxicated or were somehow acting as a drug dealer or something like that, or a prior criminal conviction, something like that would, of course, make them think twice and probably reject your application. But if it's smoking a bit of weed at school in a country where it's illegal or, something like that, more than likely you'll be allowed to enter. The clue is don't lie. Don't lie on your immigration form. And we are none the wiser because that form has not been released. So again, just more questions have been raised. We do know that we don't know because the immigration form hasn't been released, but the heavy redactions on all the other transcripts and documents regard arguments that have been made in court in regards to information that should be made public or not should be made public. What is in the public interest? What isn't in the public interest? And that is what's really piquing everyone's interest now, because they're saying, what is under those black bars? What is it that they don't want us to know about Prince Harry? Now, I also went back because there's a lot of sort of misinformation, exaggeration, distortion of what it is that Prince Harry has actually admitted to in his memoir Spare. So like I said, I spent the morning and it's been incredibly painful, but I went back to check. I needed copious cups of coffee and breaks. I had to walk around looking through all that again. This is what I found, and this is what I found that he did actually reveal, and this is the basis that the Heritage Foundation went ahead pursuing this matter, because of what Prince Harry himself has revealed in his memoir Spare, which was published back in January 2023. How could we forget? We could never forget that, could we? Okay, so cannabis or marijuana. He recounted smoking cannabis at Eton, and it was quite an amusing story. He was straddling the loo and he was looking out a window and he was imagining all sorts of things about this fox that he was seeing sort of making its way across the courtyard. He even imagined that the fox was speaking to him while his royal bodyguard was just waiting outside the bathroom door. Also, he mentioned that he did use cannabis in Kensington Palace, and he also mentioned he used it at a shooting weekend at a friend's place, and he actually described smoking rolled joints from a stash kept in a tin, as all good rolled joints are when you go on a shooting weekend at a friend's country house. Next thing was cocaine. Harry admitted to trying cocaine during a weekend party in the UK when he was around 17 years of age. Now, whether that is ongoing or not, he doesn't divulge in Spare. Now, over the years, there's been lots of comedians making rather funny jokes. Also, South Park has made references. There's been lots of references to Prince Harry having cocaine use post 17. These are just allegations. These are rumours. They haven't been verified. And of course, in heavily redacted documents, we never know whether he's ever been done for having a little plastic packet of white powder when he's entered any country on a private jet. We don't know. And I doubt he has. I believe Harry. I believe him 100%. The cocaine he tried when he was 17 is very definitely probably it. He described being offered a line at someone's house and taking it, though he noted, and this is a quote from his book, it didn't do much for him. It didn't really make him feel very different, which he attributed to the social setting that he was in rather than the drug being ineffectual in itself. He suggested, though, he implied that it wasn't a one-off, but he didn't detail for us any further instances, which is a little bit disappointing. I would have liked to have known. I'd also like to know if there was any further instances, with any lady loves. That'd be a fascinating tale, wouldn't it? Third thing he admitted to taking was psychedelic mushrooms. He wrote about using magic mushrooms during a trip to California in 2016, as you do. Now, of course, there's a lot of speculation that the actual meeting date between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, that's been, disputed by quite a few people, bringing in evidence of the fact that they feel, although they can't definitively prove, that they may have actually met earlier. I've done videos like that myself, and actually I'll try and link them down below, but I actually did discover a slip that one of their friends made, which indicated that they did meet probably a year prior to when they said. So I'll link that down below and you can check it out and decide for yourself. Now, the psychedelic mushrooms was at a party at Courtney Cox's house, and he described consuming them with friends and washing them down with tequila, which is pretty dumb. I wouldn't mix magic mushrooms with tequila, but anyway, he experienced vivid hallucinations. He even thought that the toilet and the sink came alive in Courtney Cox's house. Now, I doubt that Harry has risked using magic mushrooms again, because imagine if in his supposed mansion that he lives in with the 16 bathrooms and the 16 toilets and sinks, if they all came alive at once. Can you imagine? Not the march of the zombies, but the march of the toilets around his mansion all coming alive. It would be absolutely terrifying. Finally, he revealed in Spare about ayahuasca, and he admitted that he used this brew as part of a therapeutic experience. Now, we know that he did admit that actually in the interview with Gabrielle Maté, which was, controversial in itself, because Gabrielle Maté actually came out much later and said he regretted doing that interview. I don't think it was very beneficial for his professional image at the time. Anyway, when Harry tried ayahuasca, he was guided by a professional. He didn't specify where, when, but he framed it as a positive experience. He framed it as profound, a healing encounter. He tied it to the broader narrative of seeking mental health support after trauma due to his mother's death. Whenever he needs to justify any action, he pulls out the trauma of his mother's death. Imagine if Prince William pulled out the trauma of his mother's death every time he was criticised in the media, or every time he received any significant blowback for an action that he took. People wouldn't be very sympathetic, would they? But Harry does it all the time. He evokes it all the time. Even when he accepted the Pat Tillman Award and people were dismayed and appalled, he dragged her out once again and hid behind Invictus Veterans to actually receive the award. So he's very good at not being held accountable. I think that probably stems from a childhood of not having to be accountable. I think the few times that, the then Prince Charles tried to hold him accountable, Harry has misinterpreted that as a loving parent trying to improve his behaviour, but rather trying to elevate Queen Camilla's image by throwing Harry under the bus. That is Harry's interpretation of it. Looking back through all the accounts of that, I don't see that in it. I see it as a parent desperate, trying to force him to face up to what he was doing and trying to, force him to actually clean up his act. And the fact that the newspapers discovered all of this, I don't think it was the palace's doing. I think the palace had tried to protect him for most of his life and tried to cover a lot of his dastardly deeds up, which hasn't served him, because now he's still getting into trouble. He's sort of outside, supposedly, palace protection. So I don't think they did him any favours. I think it's always good. There's a point, isn't there, where children have to be held accountable for their actions. And that is a sideline to what the Heritage Foundation is trying to raise. There's also trying to establish whether Prince Harry in the USA is actually receiving any palace protection, whether it be just through diplomatic intervention when he's done something stupid or unfortunate, or done something that would get anybody else into some form of trouble. Now, I'm not saying it's coming from, his father. I think his father has pretty much washed his hands of him. But let's face it, it is the palace aides and the people that work for the institution of the monarchy. It is their job, regardless of how they feel about King Charles III or even the late Queen Elizabeth II or even Prince Harry or Prince William, their feelings about any principles do not come into it. Their job is to protect the institution of the monarchy. So that is always ongoing, regardless of anyone's personal feelings or personal involvement or whatever's going on within the family. There are always people protecting the institution of the monarchy, ensuring that it goes on, ensuring that the succession can happen for the next heir. And that is always ongoing. It is not affected by any ructions between family members. So what's being tried to be established here? They tried to get information released to the public so it could be determined, did Harry receive any special favours? Did he lie on an immigration form? Is he still receiving some form of diplomatic protection? Because is there something in those redacted forms which means that no one else would get that form of protection? No one else would get that form of treatment. So I'm going to go to your comments now and just see what you have to say. Let's see what Veronica has to say. How disgusting to keep using your mum for relevancy. I agree, Veronica. I mean, there's a point you've got to grow up, isn't there? It's below contempt. No wonder William doesn't want him anywhere near him. Yes, I imagine that it would be extremely difficult to have a brother constantly using your mother as an excuse, also using your mother as a form of earning income. attracting attention. He seems to have gone a little quiet on that of late. He's not been quite so blatant as he was. Pretty much from that time when the bullying article came out in the Hollywood Reporter about Meghan Markle, Harry has stuck pretty much to public appearances related to charity, related to the Invictus Games. He's been very careful. I think he was told to pull his head in. I really do think he was told to pull his head in, that he's stepping very, very close to the mark. Now, if he was told to pull his head in, that would suggest that he is in some way still being protected, but I see that Lady C in a very recent video has said that if he brings any more shame on the family, or if there's any ramifications from a proposed divorce from Meghan Markle or anything, I presume, to do with any of this, there is suggestions that the royal family will actually wash their hands of him at that point, because they're full up with it. They're at that point. Now, that is what she is claiming, and she does cite inside information. I know she does have contacts from within, the institution. How accurate those contacts are, I don't know. How relevant those contacts are now, I don't know. But it's interesting. It's interesting. Maybe they are really full up with anything. And this is from Queen Red Special. So many people are being deported who are poor and have no protection of any kind. He is entitled and protected. Again, a very good point. And I think, that's why people want to know. Because people also want to know, is any actual criminal convictions being covered up? Has there been any, police? There was suggestion last year that what was being covered up had something to do with some sort of police matter. But then it was implied later, it was later clarified, it's probably to do with security concerns. But the thing is, and that's what my mate Andrew Loney always makes the point, often security concerns when it comes to the royals is applied inaccurately. So they use that as like I said, a get out of jail free card, which is just, I'm just using that phrase. Of course, I'm not implying that any of them should be in jail. I'm not. It's just a phrase, just a monopoly phrase. But it's a good point that if valid sort of exemptions from the Freedom of Information Act are used incorrectly, when they shouldn't be, it undermines those valid claims when they are used for sincere security reasons. It undermines the belief the general public has in the institution, in the system. It also undermines people's faith in the USA immigration system if they feel that special favours are being done, if exemptions are being made. People have had enough of it. And I would even suggest, without getting political, that actually tied into the vote for Donald Trump in the USA, because there was a perception that there would be more transparency, particularly with the involvement of Elon Musk. People thought that there would be more transparency, there would be more accountability. We're yet to see if that is the case. So it's interesting, and it's interesting why these cases are being challenged. I think it's good to challenge. It's always good to push and find out, because we shouldn't be frightened of the truth. We should be able to deal with it. Even those of us that are, monarchists, that believe in it as a system of the constitutional monarchy as a good system of government for our countries, which I do for my country. And I know that a lot of Canadians believe in the Westminster system for their country. They believe in the system, but we have to have faith in a just, fair, transparent and accountable system. And if there are, anything that makes us doubt that, it's got to be dealt with. It's got to be dealt with. We're all adults. We can still have faith in a system of government, in a constitutional monarchy. It's not really about the individuals involved. It's about a system that we believe in. Now, human beings are flawed, and human beings will let us down on a frequent basis. I'm sure I let people down on a frequent basis because I'm human. But it's not about the humans that are in these institutions. It's about how these institutions are run. And they've got to be seen to be transparent and accountable. And that's where I can, oh, look, I always go for the same people. Sorry, Queen Red Special. I always go for the same people because I just seem to get attracted to, the way people express themselves. Harry will purchase the $5 million gold card, green card, fast track, straight into Trump's pocket. Well, now we've got to clarify that. It's not going straight into Trump's pocket. I think we have to be very clear about that. The $5 million cards do not go straight into anyone's pocket. If there's some shenanigans at a later date that, funnel funds in nefarious ways, that's a different issue. And if that ever comes up, well, yeah, I'll report on that. Like I said, institutions have to be transparent and accountable. But you make a very good point that, yes, he could well afford to do that. The only thing that is really interesting is his pathway to citizenship. I don't think he'll do it because he would have to give up his titles. And at that point, he loses all of Daddy's, possible favour and protection at that point. If he was to break up with Meghan Markle, it would also sort of undermine his position as far as the children go. If he stays a UK citizen, I mean, he's obviously got a lot of power. He's got a lot more punch in the game. When it all comes down to it, King Charles III can actually take custody of those children. That is the law. His Majesty can deem that he will take custody of his grandchildren and bring them up if he deems it is necessary. That is actually the power that he has. Now, CCD is actually laughing out loud at me. He thinks, or she thinks, that I'm naive about the 5 million. We'll see. You might be right. Okay, let's have a look at this from Barbara. Hi, Barbara. Yes, Hazard has been behaving better recently, and for the sake of William and the royal family, I hope this continues. You are correct that some admitted drug users are admitted into the USA. Yes, I think it's very much a case if there is any criminal convictions, also if there's any sort of evidence of ongoing use, if it's current. I mean, if you turn up at the border trying to get in and you're stoned off your face, you'll probably have a bit of trouble being admitted into the country. So, yeah, it is interesting, though. And it makes you wonder whether they're going to pull out that it's actually been heavily redacted and that his immigration form hasn't been released due to public interest under security concerns. That will be very interesting because that is, like I said, all the information on the royal family is actually not available, largely due to this exemption they have under security concerns. And Andrew Loney has even made the point that sometimes archives that are over 100 years old that have been previously available to the public have now been closed due to security concerns. And it's just a ludicrous argument. And it, like I said, it undermines people's faith in the system. There has to be more transparency. I can't see the problem in learning about Harry's immigration form and what he ticked unless what he ticked is going to open up a whole big tin of worms. Can you? It sort of leads to that suggestion and that implication, but that is just speculation. That's not fact. I've just given you the facts today of what happens. This is from Stephanie Barrett. It's clearly current for Harry. Did he admit that on his visa form? Well, that's what we want to know, Stephanie. That's what we want to know. And also, we have to have evidence to say that it's clearly current. We can think it. It can be our personal opinion from observations that we have made, but we need evidence, and that's the point we would need. And obviously, that's the tin of worms. If they release that immigration form and then the Heritage Foundation challenges the information that he did tick based on what he wrote in Spare and based on current observations, they would then have to prove that claim. And so they would have to come up with some form of proof Usually proof of current drug use is in the form of maybe entry to rehab. Also, it could be proof of cautions by the police, not necessarily convictions, things like that. And it did make me wonder in this redacted information, like I said last year, there was a suggestion that certain medical information had been redacted and kept back. I can understand medical information being kept private. I mean, we all want our medical information kept private. But it did make me wonder what that actually included and whether there was a mention of any form of rehab in the past or current. I was listening to Washington, D.C. attorney earlier today. If I understood him correctly, Judge Nichols' decision listed reasons why the Department of Homeland Security would not release the documents. Yes, he did. And it's quite interesting how it hasn't been reported on accurately. I've got to get hold of the actual court documents myself. All I was aware of was that the 80 pages had been released and what they contained and what they had been redacted. So it's a case of wading through all of them and trying to make sense. I had a quick look at a few, and that's where I discovered that clearly medical information had actually been redacted. But it's hard to know what had been redacted, and that's my main interest. I think that's everyone's main interest. So tell me, Mark, have you gone through the judgment by Judge Nichol and actually come to any conclusions and looked at the documents? Because please do share it. It would be interesting to find out. Before I go I wanted to just mention about Megan's as ever trademark application. Now, this still can't be verified because there's a confirming intent statement which was left unsigned. And evidently she was a little too broad again. She was too indefinite or too broad in what she actually wanted to sell. So they want some clarification. But as far as the trademark actual applications go, there's no real objection. That seems to have the go-ahead. It looks like she is going to be able to obtain the trademark for as ever, but it has been slightly held up by the US Patent and Trademark Office. There's been no conflicting trademarks found, but this form left unsigned, a statement of confirming intent. It makes you wonder who she is hiring to actually put in these forms, because a similar thing happened back with American Riviera Orchard. Similar thing happened actually with declarations about Archwell with unsigned forms that should have been signed before they were submitted. So someone isn't very good at signing things, and that tends to hold things up. It did cross my mind whether that is maybe a deliberate ploy to ensure a bit of free publicity, because every time these applications and documents get held up, there's a raft of public interest. There's a lot of newspaper reports about it, and, maybe it's a ploy. I don't know. But then again, maybe I'm just getting way too cynical. Let me think what you think in the comments down below. If you're watching this live on replay, I'd be very interested to read them. And also, Mark, if you have any further information about Judge Nichols' actual judgment, could you leave them in the comments below this video? Because I think a lot of people would really enjoy reading that and making the most of your knowledge. So I'll see you all again really soon, and interesting stuff. Can't wait to see what you think about it all. See you later. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining me, by the way. Bye.